"Mister, she saved you." Two toddlers show him their mother, who took the bullet meant for him. He had survived everything the world threw at him. He was not prepared for two children and a direction. Jun Seo Kwon moved through the gray early morning the way he moved through everything, with his head down, his coffee in his grip, and his entire body arranged to communicate that he was not available. Not to anyone. He had spent the better part of 4 decades making himself into a man who required nothing from the world and offered it the same courtesy. He had refined it into something close to an art form. He had chosen Itaewon for this reason. In a neighborhood that received people from everywhere and asked nothing about where they came from, a man could live for years without being known. He had used a place built on warmth and community as cover for being entirely alone. He did not examine this irony. He had a policy of not examining ironies. Itaewon before 7 was a different city than Itaewon at midnight, stripped of its noise and its performance, reduced to the actual neighborhood underneath. Narrower streets than tourists expected. The smell of cooking oil from restaurants not yet open. The particular quiet of a place that had been loud too recently to have fully recovered. Jun Seo stood outside his building with his back against the brick, his cup at his lips, his eyes already moving, left, right, down the block, back, the way they had moved since he was 22 years old, and learned that the world announces its intentions in peripheral details before it announces them directly. He was already turning to go back inside when they appeared. 2 children, young, not yet in school, both of them. A girl in a red padded jacket with her hair in 2 uneven braids. A boy slightly taller in a navy coat with a toggle button missing from the collar. They were walking toward him the way people walk when they have already settled the question of where they are going, and the remaining distance is simply a formality. Jun Seo did not move. He was not a man who softened at the sight of children. He registered their presence neutrally, efficiently, moving immediately to the question of what their presence required of him in practical terms. But these two were not behaving the way children behaved around strangers. There was no hesitation, no reaching for each other in uncertainty, no shy assessment from a safe distance. They walked directly to him as though the concept of stranger did not apply. And the girl reached up and took his left hand, and the boy reached up and took his right. And then they turned, both of them, in the same motion, with the same quality of certainty, toward the hill that rose behind Itaewon. Toward the older part of the neighborhood, where the streets narrowed further, and the foreign restaurants gave way to small temples and overgrown staircases, and the parts of the city that had not yet been renovated into something photogenic. They pulled. Not hard, steady, directional, the specific pull of people who are not demanding but are communicating a fact: this is where we are going. You are part of this. That is simply what is true. He looked down at his left hand, then his right, small fingers wrapped around his. The girl's grip was warm and deliberate. The boy's was precise, the grip of a child who understood that the hand he was holding was one that might need convincing. He should have said no. He knew how to say no in 3 languages. He should have released their hands and called for a nearby adult and done the reasonable thing. He took 1 step, and then another. And those steps did not feel like decisions. They felt like the completion of something that had been set in motion long before this morning. Something whose momentum had been building in the dark for years and had only now arrived at the surface in the form of 2 small hands and a direction he had not chosen and could not seem to refuse. The city changed as they climbed. Itaewon's international face fell away behind them, and the streets became the streets of an older Seoul, steep staircases cut into hillsides, walls covered in the faded remnants of old paint, the particular smell of stone that has absorbed decades of weather. The children climbed without effort, simply moving upward because upward was the direction. Jun Seo's breathing changed by the 3rd staircase. He did not acknowledge this. The girl had something in her free hand. A small flat object held against her palm with her fingers curled over it, held with the careful grip of someone transporting something that has been designated important by someone whose designations she takes seriously. He did not ask about it. The question formed, and he let it stand unanswered, because something in the logic of the morning told him the answer was already on its way. His mind had been running its standard assessment since they began walking: threat, environment, exit, unknown variables. And somewhere in the third block of climbing, it went quiet in a way that was not its habit. Junseo's mind did not go quiet. It was the machine he relied on most completely. The machine that had been running without interruption since he was 22 years old, and the event that defined everything that came after. He had survived a shooting 8 years ago on a street 2 hills south of where he was currently climbing. He had told the story of that survival to himself so many times it had become geology rather than narrative. Not a story he chose to believe, but a foundation he stood on without thinking about what it was made of. He survived because he was quick, because his reflexes were faster than the situation expected, because he was the kind of man who made it. He had been telling himself that for 8 years. In the quiet created by the machine's absence, something surfaced. Not memory exactly. Sensation. The smell of Itaewon in November. The sound of a street at 2 in the morning that had been full and was suddenly not. The feeling of his body against cold pavement and the immediate animal assessment. Alive, intact, the situation has changed, move. The path between 2 old walls opened ahead of them, and the children took it without slowing. Junseo followed and felt, in the quality of the morning's silence and the children's certainty, and the thing the girl was carrying against her palm, the first faint pressure of something that had been sealed for 8 years beginning, very slowly, to want out. The path brought them to a slope behind a small temple, closed for renovation long enough that the notices on its gate had faded to near illegibility. Behind the temple, the trees thickened into something genuinely old, the kind of growth that predates the decisions made about the land around it, and persists through them with the patient indifference of things that do not require permission to continue existing. The children moved into the trees. Junseo moved with them. He had rewritten the night of the shooting 100 times, until his survival made sense. He was about to find out he had been working from an incomplete draft. The ground was soft from recent rain. The trees grew close together, their canopy filtering the early light into something green and diffuse that made the whole slope feel suspended in a different hour than the city below. He noticed the children's movement had shifted. On the streets below, they had moved with purpose, but also with the ambient awareness of children navigating a public space. Here they moved with something more internal, as though the path they were following existed less in the geography of the hillside and more in some map they carried that the hillside had been arranged to match. They knew this place. That understanding settled into Junseo's chest with the specific weight of something that has implications he is not yet ready to examine. The girl still held the object in her free hand. He could see now that it was a photograph, the white border of a printed image worn soft from handling. He thought about asking. He did not ask. Something about the way she was holding it stopped him. The photograph was not an object to her. It was a responsibility, and whatever she was carrying it toward was something she had been carrying it toward for longer than this morning. He was 3 steps from the top of the slope when the trees thinned, and he saw the clearing. Small, the size of a modest room, grass that had been growing unmanaged through multiple seasons. A quality of enclosure created by the trees on every side that made it feel less like a gap in the forest and more like a room the forest had decided to provide. At the far edge of the clearing, where the tree line closed again, there was a mound of earth. Low, long, deliberately placed. He knew what it was before the children reached it. He stopped at the edge of the clearing. The children continued to the mound and stopped too, turning back to look at him with the same patience that had characterized their conduct all morning. Not rushing him, not pulling, simply waiting for him to complete the distance between where he was standing and where the morning required him to be. His feet moved. The overgrowth around the mound's edges was the particular vegetation of a place that had not been tended in a very long time. Tall grass, creeping vine, the specific wildflowers that colonize disturbed earth. A place where no one came regularly. a place that had been holding something without anyone to witness the holding. He stood at the foot of it, with the children on either side. The girl opened her hand. The photograph had been held long enough that its edges were soft, the paper carrying the texture of something that had been a companion rather than an object. She held it out toward him with both hands, the specific offering of a child who has been told that this matters and has internalized the instruction completely. He took it. The woman in the photograph was black, young, mid-20s at most, with natural hair framing a face that was not performing anything for the camera. She was simply in a moment of warmth, entirely present in it, looking at the lens with the expression of someone who is genuinely happy and requires no confirmation of that fact. She was holding 2 infants, one in each arm, newborn or close to it. Jun Seo looked at the girl in the red jacket. He looked at the boy in the navy coat. He looked at the infants in the photograph. The recognition was not subtle. It did not require inference or interpretation. The infants in the photograph and the children standing beside him were the same people at different points in the brief chronology of their lives. And the woman holding them was a woman whose face Jun Seo had never seen, whose name he did not know, and whose presence at the edge of a grave on a hillside in Itaewon felt like the arrival of something that had been traveling toward him with great patience for a very long time. The boy moved to the head of the mound. He knelt in the grass without ceremony and began clearing the soil near the top with both hands, pushing aside damp earth and leaf debris to reveal something flat and deliberate beneath. A piece of wood, rough cut and hand-carved, driven into the ground by someone who had no professional tools and used that absence as no argument against the attempt. A name had been carved into it. Jun Seo leaned forward. He read it. He read it again. His hands were not steady. He had built 41 years of architecture around the premise that his hands would always be steady, that the machine would always run, that he was the kind of man who assessed and calculated and responded and moved and did not stop to feel the weight of what the moving had cost. The architecture was not holding. And then he did the thing that no amount of careful self-construction can ultimately prevent when a person is standing at the grave of someone who died, so that they could be standing anywhere at all. He went to his knees. His hands pressed flat against the earth. His head dropped. The photograph was still in his right hand, and the mourning continued around him with the complete indifference of mornings. The birds in the canopy above conducting their business, the city below beginning its day, and Jun Seo Kwon on his knees at a grave on a hillside, understanding for the first time that the story he had been telling himself about his own survival was missing its most essential character. The boy sat down beside him, close, his small shoulder against Jun Seo's arm. No words, no gesture beyond the refusal to allow distance. The specific and irreducible act of staying, which is sometimes the whole of what one person can offer another, and which is, in the right moment, more than enough. Jun Seo did not move away. After 41 years of constructing distances, a child's shoulder against his arm in a clearing on a Seoul hillside was the thing he did not move away from. He stayed. The light shifted, the morning advanced, he stayed. Right here, pause for just 1 second. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you are watching this from, because this story is reaching people everywhere and we want to know where you are. Now stay, because the woman who sent these children to find him wrote him a letter 6 days before she died, and what she wrote in it will change everything. He was still on the ground when the sound came through the trees. A single footstep on the soft path behind the tree line, placed with the careful deliberateness of someone who knows the terrain and is choosing their moment. Then another. Then silence. Then one more. Jun Seo turned. The figure stood at the tree line, far enough back that the details of the face were not yet legible but close enough that the posture was, and the posture communicated something he had learned, through years of reading people at distance, to identify immediately. Not threat, not hesitation. The specific stillness of someone who arrived early, chose to wait, and is now watching the moment they have been waiting for complete itself. The figure stepped forward into the clearing. She was an older black woman. She moved with the deliberateness of someone who has carried a significant weight for a long time and has developed the particular posture of people who carry weight not by minimizing it, but by finding the correct way to hold it. Her hair was silver and natural. Her face had been shaped by something beyond age alone, something sustained, something that had pressed itself into the lines of her skin over years rather than arriving all at once. He did not need to search for the resemblance, the bone structure, the particular quality of her eyes, the same darkness and the same shape as the eyes in the photograph, older by 3 decades but unmistakable. She was the mother of the woman in the grave. He understood this before she reached him. He stood. They looked at each other across the mound. He thought about all the things he had walked away from in his adult life, all the rooms he had left before the conversation became real, all the people he had moved away from before they could become necessary, all the exits he had taken before the weight of staying could accumulate. Standing across a grave from this woman, the exits were not available. Her name was Dorothy Adesanya. She told him this in Korean that was precise and slightly formal, the Korean of someone who learned it deliberately, who had been in Seoul long enough to acquire fluency, but not so long that the effort had disappeared into automaticity. She had been in Seoul for 12 years. Her daughter had been here for 5 when she died. Jun Seo stood with the photograph and the grave between himself and this woman, and he felt the specific insufficiency of everything language had ever offered him. He was a man who had used language as a management tool his entire adult life, precise, controlled, deployed to create specific effects. He had no deployment for this. There was only the mourning and the grave and this woman who had crossed an ocean and buried her daughter in borrowed ground and spent 8 years deciding how to find the man whose survival her daughter had purchased. She told him about Alina. Alina Adesanya had come to Seoul at 23 on a teaching contract. She had stayed because Seoul had become hers in the way cities become people's, gradually, through the accumulation of routines and relationships and the specific knowledge of a place that transforms it from a location into a home. She learned Korean with focused determination. She made friends in Itaewon's Black Korean community, people who existed in the intersection of identities that Seoul was still learning to accommodate, who had built their own spaces and their own networks in the gaps between the city's official categories. She became a nurse. She finished her Korean nursing certification 18 months before she died. She worked nights at a small clinic in Yongsan, the kind that served Itaewon's late population, the workers finishing late shifts, the people who needed care at hours when the larger hospitals felt inaccessible. She knew the neighborhood the way night workers know neighborhoods, from the inside of its hours, from the specific geography of 2 and 3 in the morning, when the city's performance has concluded, and what remains is what was always there underneath. She was the mother of 2 children. Their father was Korean and no longer in the picture, and Dorothy spoke of him with the specific economy of someone who has decided to spend no more words on a subject than it has earned. The children's names were Lily and James. Dorothy looked at them when she said their names, and in the looking was the expression that belongs to people who love something so completely, it produces gratitude and grief in the same breath. He said, "Tell me about the night." Dorothy looked at him for a long moment, calibrating how much he was ready to hear, whether the alternative to readiness was even available at this point. She determined it was not. She told him. Alina had been finishing a shift. The clinic closed at 2, and she had a 20-minute walk home through streets she had navigated hundreds of times. The route took her through the block where Jun Seo had his meeting with a man named Park Di-hyun, a man who operated in the specific overlap between legitimate business and its opposite, and with whom Jun Seo had dealings he had since worked very hard to leave behind. She was behind him by approximately 15 meters, walking in the same direction. She saw the man come out of the alley before Jun Seo did. She saw the gun. She saw the angle. She had 15 meters of distance and the specific advantage of someone who could see the full geometry of what was about to happen from a position that the intended target could not occupy, because he was the intended target. She had 3 seconds. She had 2 children at home, 11 months old, with a neighbor since 9 that evening. She was 28 years old. 4 months into a job she had worked 3 years to qualify for. She had a trip home to Lagos planned for the spring, the first time she would see her mother in 18 months. She moved. Not dramatically, not with the architecture of a cinematic sacrifice. She simply closed the 15 meters between herself and Jun Seo with the directness of a woman who has made a decision and is executing it, and she put herself in the space between the gun and the man it was aimed at. The bullet that was traveling toward Jun Seo Kwon found Alina Adesanya instead. Jun Seo was already going down before the shot landed, his body responding to the sound of movement behind him, the peripheral signal of threat, the trained reflex he had spent 8 years calling his survival instinct. He hit the pavement. He heard the shot. He processed the aftermath. He got up. He moved. He did what you do when you have survived. He did not see Alina on the ground behind him. He had never seen her at all. The silence in the clearing after Dorothy finished speaking was the silence of a space that has received something very large and is making room for it. Jun Seo stood in that silence and felt it pressing against every wall he had ever built and finding each one, finally, insufficient. He said, "I need to tell you something." It was in his face already. Dorothy could see it, the quality of a person who has been carrying something at a tilt for a long time and is finally going to set it down in the correct position. The man he was meeting that night, Park Di-hyun, he told her directly, the words coming out less like speaking and more like releasing, like opening a valve closed for 8 years under significant pressure. Park Di-hyun was involved in things Jun Seo had allowed himself to be adjacent to. Not participant, he had always held that line. But adjacent. The specific proximity of a man who benefits from an arrangement without dirtying his hands in it. The man who came out of the alley that night was not a random threat. He was there for Jun Seo specifically, because of Park Di-hyun, because of a dispute within Park's network that had generated, without Jun Seo's full understanding, a decision that someone needed to be removed. That someone was Jun Seo, and the location of that removal had been communicated through a chain that led back to a meeting Jun Seo had agreed to attend, on a street he had chosen, at a time he had set. He had put himself on that street. Alina Adesanya had been on that street because of where she worked and the route she walked home. Nothing about her presence connected to him. She was simply there. She saw. She acted. But the reason there was something to see, the reason the gun existed, and the man existed, and the specific geometry of that 2 a.m. moment existed, was Jun Seo. His choices, his associations, his decision to be useful to dangerous people, and his confidence that usefulness was insulation. Alina Adesanya died because of who Jun Seo Kwon chose to be in the years before that night. He did not say it in those words. He did not need to. He laid out the facts, and the facts were sufficient, and Dorothy Adesanya stood across the grave of her daughter and listened to a man explain, in precise and controlled language, that the circumstances which placed her daughter in that location on that night were circumstances he had created. Jun Seo had always known, at the level below knowing, that the shooting was not random. He had filed that knowledge in the place where people file things they cannot afford to fully examine, and he had built on top of the filing for 8 years. And the children had walked him up a hillside to the grave of the woman his choices had killed, and he was not going to stand at that grave and withhold the one true thing he could offer it. Dorothy was quiet for a very long time. The clearing held that quiet without judgment, without urgency, with the patience of a space that has been a witness long enough to understand that the most important things require the most time. She did not forgive him in that moment. He did not ask her to. He was not operating under the illusion that confession and forgiveness were the same transaction. He stood with his hands at his sides, and Dorothy Adesanya looking at him from across the mound with eyes that held everything that 8 years of raising 2 children alone in a foreign city, while carrying a grief that had no resolution had put there. What she said, after the long quiet, was this. She had spent 8 years trying to understand how to be angry at the right thing, not at Alina, whose choices belonged entirely to Alina, and who had been exactly who she was in the moment it cost the most to be that. Not at Jun Seo precisely, because anger at a specific person required knowing that person, and she had not known who he was until 3 months ago. She had been angry at the situation, at the mathematics, at the particular way the world had arranged itself so that her daughter's extraordinary character became the mechanism of her death. Finding him had not resolved that anger, but it had given it an address. And an address, she said, was better than none. He said, "How did you find me?" "The same way Alina found everything," Dorothy said. "She worked at it. 8 years of being present in Itaewon's Black Korean community produces a quality of trust that produces information. She had known about Park D-hyun for 4 years. 2 more years to connect him to Jun Seo with sufficient clarity. Then 2 years deciding what to do with that clarity. Lily and James, she said, were the decision. The children were sitting together in the grass beside the grave, Lily with her legs crossed, James with his arms around his knees. Present to the conversation, the way children are present to conversations they have been prepared for. Aware that something significant is happening, that they came here for a reason and the reason is being fulfilled. They knew their mother from Dorothy. They knew she was a nurse who worked nights and loved Seoul and read books about birds and made jollof rice on Sunday mornings and could make anyone feel like the most interesting person in the room. They knew she was brave, not dramatic bravery, not bravery that announced itself, but the bravery of a person who simply did not negotiate with the question of what the moment required. They did not know, until Dorothy decided they were ready, that there was a man in Itaewon whose survival their mother had purchased. That finding him and bringing him to this hill was the last thing their mother's story needed in order to be complete. Complete, Jun Seo said. The word cost him something to repeat. Do you mean that? Is this something that can be complete? Dorothy looked at him with the steadiness of a woman who has asked herself that question many more times than he has, and arrived at an answer she did not originally choose, but has since made entirely her own. Complete does not mean resolved, she said. It means the story has all its parts. My daughter's story was missing a part. It was missing the person who knows what she did and why it mattered and what it cost and who carries that. She looked at him directly. Now the story has that person. He turned to Dorothy. He told her about the stone, not requesting her approval, stating his intention. There would be a stone, a proper one with Alina's name and her dates and whatever Dorothy wanted on it. He would arrange it. He would pay for it. That was not negotiation. That was the first item on a list that did not have an end. Then he crouched down to Lily and James. Not performing gentleness, simply bringing himself to the height of people he needed to look at directly. He told them his name. He told them their mother was extraordinary, not because of what she did on one night, but because the kind of person who does what she did on one night is the kind of person who does extraordinary things every day in the ways that no one records and no one photographs, and no one buries on a hillside with a hand-carved marker. The one night was the record of all the days. He told them he would like, if they were willing, to know them. Lily looked at James. James looked at Lily. Some communication completed itself. Lily looked back at him. Okay, she said. The walk down was different from every walk Jun Seo had taken in Itaewon in 11 years of living in it. The children led, as they had led all morning. Dorothy came behind them all, her footsteps on the stone stairs deliberate, unhurried, the sound of someone who has reached the end of something very long and is taking the final steps at the pace they deserve. The city came back gradually. The temple gate, the narrow streets, the first smell of cooking, Seoul reassembling itself around them as they descended, the city reclaiming them with the magnificent indifference it extended to everyone, asking nothing about where they had been or what they had found there. Jun Seo walked with the photograph in his inside pocket, against his chest. Lily looked back at him from 3 steps ahead on the last staircase. Are you hungry? She said. He almost laughed. He could feel it, the specific internal sensation of something that wanted to be laughter arriving in a body not accustomed to its presence, finding the pathways slightly unfamiliar, moving through them anyway. "Yes," he said, "I am." "There is a place near here," James said. "On the corner. They have good sunjubu." Not a suggestion, a statement about the state of the world. "The sunjubu at the place on the corner is good. This is known. We are going there." They walked to the corner. The restaurant was small and already half full with the early crowd, construction workers and market vendors, and the particular category of Seoul resident who eats breakfast seriously and early and without apology. The ajumma who ran the floor sat them at a table near the window and brought banchan without being asked. They ate. Junseo sat across from Lily and James with a bowl of sunjubu in front of him and the steam rising from it, and he was present to it in a way he had not been present to an ordinary moment in longer than he could clearly measure. Not analyzing it, not assessing it, simply in it, the way you are in things when you have stopped preparing to leave them. James finished his sunjubu with the focused efficiency of a child who had been very patient about being very hungry. He set his spoon down and looked at Junseo. "Did you know our mother?" he asked, "before?" Junseo looked at him. "No," he said, "I did not know her. I know her now." He paused. "I am going to keep knowing her." James considered this the way children consider answers that are more complicated than yes or no, but that they are willing to spend time on. He nodded. Outside the window, a delivery truck idled at the corner. Two women argued pleasantly about something neither of them seemed particularly invested in. A man walked by with a child on his back in a carrier, the child's head lolling with the boneless completeness of someone who had fallen asleep in transit and trusted entirely the person doing the carrying. Junseo watched through the glass and thought about a woman named Alina Adesanya who came to Seoul at 23 and made it hers and worked nights at a clinic and read books about birds and made jollof rice on Sunday mornings and died on a street 2 hills south of here because she could see what was coming and was exactly who she was. He thought about the 3 seconds she had. 3 seconds is not a long time. It is not enough time to review the relevant history or assess the competing claims or weigh the abstract value of one life against the concrete certainty of your own. 3 seconds is enough time only to be who you are. And Alina Adesanya, in 3 seconds on a street in Itaewon at 2 in the morning, had been entirely and completely who she was, without hesitation, without negotiation, without any diminishment of the fullness of what she was about to lose. She did not give him his life. She gave him the chance to decide what it was worth. He had spent all of it getting to this morning. He was going to spend what remained of it differently. Dorothy reached into her coat. She took out an envelope and placed it on the table between them. Sealed. His name written on the front in handwriting he did not recognize. Careful, precise, the handwriting of someone who understood that the pen was a tool that rewarded attention. He looked at it and did not touch it. "Alina wrote it," Dorothy said, 6 days before she died. "She gave it to me and told me to find the person it was addressed to. She did not tell me who that was. She told me I would know when I found them." His name, in Alina's handwriting, 6 days before the November night. She knew, Dorothy said quietly, not everything, but she knew something was going to happen. She had been a nurse long enough and had worked nights in Itaewon long enough to understand when the street had a particular kind of tension in it. She had been feeling that tension for 2 weeks before the night. She wrote letters, one for the children, one for me, this one. Junseo looked at the envelope and felt the weight of it in a way that had nothing to do with its dimensions. Alina Adesanya had known him, in some essential way, before he existed for her, had identified the specific person who would need what she was about to do, even before she knew who that person was or whether she would survive the doing. She had written to a stranger she had not yet met about a night she was not certain she would survive. And she had sent her children to deliver it. He picked it up. He did not open it. Not here. Not yet. Some things require a private space and a private hour and the specific quality of aloneness that is not loneliness, but its opposite, the aloneness of a person who is fully present to themselves, in order to be fully present to something important. He put the envelope in his inside pocket, next to the photograph. Against his chest. 2 things she had sent to find him. The photograph her children had carried up the hill. The letter her mother had carried across an ocean. Both of them resting now against the chest of the man they had been traveling toward for 8 years. He looked at Dorothy. He looked at Lily. He looked at James. "I would like to come back," he said, "to the clearing. With a stone when it is ready. I would like to be there when it is placed." Dorothy looked at him for a long moment. "We would like that too," she said. Outside the window, the street continued its morning. The Ajumma refilled the banchan without being asked. Lily was watching the street through the glass with the particular attention of someone who finds the world genuinely interesting and does not require it to perform for her. James had somehow acquired a second bowl of sunjubu and was addressing it with the same focused seriousness he had brought to the first. Junseo sat with the photograph and the letter against his chest, and the steam from his bowl rising between him and 3 people who were, in every way that would matter going forward, his responsibility and his inheritance, and the meaning of the rest of his life. He was not the same man who had stood on a sidewalk 2 hours ago with his coffee and his constructed distances, and his story about his own survival that had been missing its most essential character. He was the man who knew. And knowing, it turned out, was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of everything that had always been owed. That evening, alone in his apartment, he opened the letter. He read it once. He sat very still for a long time. Then he read it again. He would never tell anyone what it said. But the next morning, he was back on the hillside with flowers. And the morning after that. And every morning after that, for the rest of his life. Alina Adesanya was 28 years old. She had 2 children at home. She had 3 seconds, and she used every one of them to be exactly who she was. If this story reached something in you, if you felt the weight of that envelope, if you are still thinking about what she wrote, subscribe. Hit that button right now. Because the people who find stories like this deserve to find every story like this. And share this with someone who needs to be reminded that extraordinary people exist in ordinary moments on ordinary streets. Tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? And what do you think Alina wrote in that letter to a man she had never met? We read every single one.